Sports presents Benning Bites with Damon Benning. Benning Bites with Damon Benning.
Fantastic show yesterday. We went a lot of places. Followed up on what was Monday's show, and it was basically just like part two, right? If you left off with Monday's show, you're thinking, man, they threw a lot of things out there. I don't know. Was that those guys? Was it victim blaming? Was it not victim blaming? Were they talking about transparency and leadership and the athletic director and president? And it kind of all started to come to fruition on Monday, right? And you go from, it's well documented, the 2-week paid unpaid leave to being fired yesterday. And you're just thinking to yourself, what happened? And I'm telling you, I get it, right? The barbaric, actually, the sexually charged culture, sometimes it's in the locker room where, the boys will be boys, if you will. That part is still around, right? I think we kind of, whether we agree with it or not, that part still exists in some sports cultures and cultures in general. But the thing I'm probably the most surprised by is just kind of the lack of transparency. And this is what I was getting at on Monday's show, whether it was an anonymous source or not. I couldn't figure out for the life of me how the student newspaper got some information from an anonymous source and then corroborated it with 11 more people, but the 6-month report didn't. And without seeing what the 6-month report said, we left it open to interpretation. So, could we have redacted the names and they released the report? Because I felt like it was pretty is asking a lot of your president to turn around a day later and reissue a statement. And then you talked about calling the family, and I just was like, did we not read the report, or was what was insinuated in the Daily Northwestern not in the report? So I just had more questions than answers, and I know if they had to do it all over again, Schill and Dr. Gregg would think, like, why don't we just release the report and redact the names, because that way we can get out in front of it. Because a school that is one of the best journalism schools in the country, with so many strong folks in the media, the PR thing that was going on real time coming out of the weekend, I didn't know what to make of it. And I think that started Monday's show. And then yesterday's show, like, we really dug deep. And I kind of get it on a multitude of levels. The transparency from the administration, I've seen it go both ways, right? I've seen Bill Byrne and Coach Osborne. I've seen Steve Peterson and Coach Solich. I've seen Eichhorst and Coach Pelini. I've seen Bill Moose and Scott Frost, and I've seen Trev Alberts and Matt Rule. And I think the transparency is something that has been really, really refreshing, I think, for Nebraska fans. Not because it's novel or new around the country in terms of good leadership. It's just because we aren't used to it. Like, I've talked about that before. And I wonder if we've really learned anything from some of the scandals on college athletic campuses that have happened before about lack of transparency. And it's strange to think why the adults in the room won't be adults. And I get it, an iconic figure. And I'm not casting judgment on Pat Fitzgerald as much as I'm saying I don't think we should assume that just because people say so, like it is what it is. That's why I always give kids and young people a little bit more grace. That's why I'm always for opportunities for young people, whether it's NIL or transfers or things like that, because I just don't know if there's been a long enough track records of adults being adults where I know 100% sure that they have young people's best interests at heart. And until that kind of comes to light or fruition, I think I'm always going to be for mobility in terms of getting what you can get for the best situation for you. Because I don't want to assume, what do we talk about with the transfer portal? Oh, people aren't loyal. And then you go in the back and forth where coaches aren't either and admins aren't either. And they're not always doing right by kids. Well, okay. Well, if kids are really going to be looked at as a commodity, they should be able to recruit some things in the meantime. Well, what happened to the purity of college athletics and the sanctity of amateur competition? Well, it doesn't appear by everybody's playing by those same virtuous by those same virtues. I don't know if there's any way to guarantee it, but until then, I think the best way to offset it is with transparency. And I know it's tough, but it beats having someone else dictate the narrative, because once media outlets and media got a hold of some of the reports that were out there, they drove the narrative. And you lost control of being able to tell the story. And I always think it doesn't matter if you're at home or you're at school, always get your story out first. I'm just kind of a firm believer of that. And remember when I talked about, man, if I was Coach Riley, what I would probably do is I'd probably have a sit down and I would talk with, just have a press conference. And I'd say, hey, listen, this and this is what I'm after. This is kind of the blueprint. This is what's happened in terms of my administrative team and trying to hire a general manager right now, and kind of some things that I would do differently. And then people would say, oh, he doesn't owe you guys that. And, well, I mean, look what happened to Coach Riley. And Coach Frost, he said, man, if he would just say, hey, listen, you know what, I've had some shortcomings in recruiting. I was super competitive. I took some chances that I ordinarily wouldn't take. It's come back to haunt me, but this is where I'm at now, as opposed to leaving it to speculation and conjecture. What if Coach Pelini would have said, hey, you know what, I couldn't get my boss to talk to me. I knocked on his door. I hadn't talked to him in X amount of time. I had to get his attention somehow before my team went to this bowl game. There's a reason I acted the way that I did on the sidelines at Iowa. Like if we know all those things, I'm not saying we have to agree with it or forgive it, but we at least know where people are coming from so we can make educated decisions on how to handle the outcome. And I'm still floored by just the willingness to try to circumvent something, knowing you've got to come back and eat it. And this is coming from a guy that spent 3 or 4 years lying about relationships that I knew I was going to have to come back and set the record straight or make amends for. And I always told myself, you know what, I'm not doing that again. I'm going to control the message. And that's just what you want in adults in terms of leadership. And I understand it, right? The players currently, some former players really upset, asking for some blockage and to not respond to or talk to, the Daily Northwestern. And I mean, we were the former player in me. I've been there. Some of the great journalists that were at the Daily Nebraska when a lot of people had opinions on how Nebraska football was being ran by our head coach, and our players saying, hey, listen, no more. We're not giving any more feedback, any more room or ammo for folks to say bad things about us. That's how we kind of deemed it at the time as 19 to 22-year-olds. Facts be damned, whether it was true or not. We just didn't want to give any ammo. So we stopped reading the school newspaper. We stopped reading the Lincoln Journal-Star. We stopped reading the Omaha World Herald. We were told specifically in some team meetings, hey, enough's enough. Don't go here. Don't do this. If you're going to do this, make sure you're at home. This is this is literally killing our coach. He's hurt. He's having to go to bat for us and defend and explain the program. It shouldn't have to come to that. Just because we know, don't assume everybody else knows. Don't give any fodder. So I get the rallying of the troops because we did it, and it was for reasons in which we believed in. We made it about us. And so I get the pushback of wanting to defend. And maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle. But I know one thing, at the end of the day, sometimes they say the truth will set you free, and it's hard, right? I'm not going to sit here and tell you that this situation could have been handled with ease. But I will say, when you're forthright and you are transparent, you leave a lot less things open to interpretation, and you can control the message. And if nothing else, people know where you're coming from, so you don't have to guess and then try to figure it out so they're not right. Like, if you want people to stop investigating your business, I don't care what it is, make your intentions known. Once your intentions are known, people stop asking questions. I'm still a little taken aback, and maybe it's because I don't have enough of the information. But what happened in 6 months in an investigative report that was either enhanced, blown up, doubled down on in just about 18 hours later by a school newspaper, which is known for good journalism. That's what the school newspaper is there for. I don't hold them accountable, just like I didn't hold the Daily Nebraskan accountable. And we know the great journalists that cranked out during that time in the 90s. It just, things that make you go, However you get us, Apple, Google, Spotify, make sure you do. We appreciate what you do. Come join us on Coffee and Cream, 7 to 10, ESPN 590, KFOR, starting at 9 o'clock in Lincoln. Be a part of what we're doing. I think it's one of the things, based on this Benning Bites, that I think you'll appreciate about Coach Rule, this staff, and this administration. He talks about accountability, talks about ownership, talks about developing young men, and he lets you in to see how it works with real-life examples. We may ask him some questions that we don't really want to know the answer to, and it kind of hurts our feelings a little bit, but at least you're operating in the know. I think that starts with good leadership with Ted Carter, Trev Alberts, and now Coach Rule. We've seen it happen at the football level, and it's unfolding before our very eyes. Some of the same attributes that we admire in Coach Cook. Oh, man. We say, he tells it like it is. That doesn't mean that we think Coach Cook is always telling the truth, or that he's always right, I should say. It just means that we know where he's coming from. And I think there's something about leadership that makes that a common denominator. It's another episode of Benning Bites.